Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Sam Shinbaga. I oversee the Community Development Group here at the ARC. Thank you for joining us for the kickoff of our annual Ideas Exchange Workshop, which is meant to serve two main purposes. One, we're looking to provide you information about the upcoming year's joint LCI and CDAP call for projects, LCI being the Livable Centers Initiative, and CDAP being the Community Development Assistance Program. And those were gearing up and are going to be launched in mid-January. We'll be sending out dates very soon. And the second is this being a forum for us to discuss your project ideas with you and see how they may be a good fit for either programs, and ultimately continue that conversation to help craft applications that might be good fit for either of those programs. Before we begin, we wanted to take a quick poll, actually 2 questions for the folks that are joining us this morning. And I believe those questions should be coming up on your screens momentarily. And we're just trying to get an understanding of who's joining us today in terms of your background and also which program you were interested in. So Molly, is that something that folks should be seeing on their screens at this point?
Not at the moment. We've got a little technical difficulty. Someone else from community development has logged in as ARC, and it appears that inactivates the polling session. So we're gonna fix that right now, and then we'll get that poll up in just a minute.
Okay. How about we come back to the poll after I finished opening it up? Actually, you know what? It's on the screen right now. I see it.
I see something too.
Hopefully everyone can see. So the first question we're asking you is which ARC program you're interested in participating in 2021, that being LCI, that being CDAP, both, or neither. You're just here to get some good information and hear our wonderful speakers, and that's fine as well. And then the second question being, again, which sector do you represent? Or you're representing us as this morning, again, from the private sector, the public sector, nonprofit, education, or it's none of those sectors. So seems like there is, as I'm seeing the numbers come in, there's definitely a strong interest in LCI. There's a fair number of people, actually, most people are interested in both programs. So that's great to hear. A strong presence from our public sector folks, that is excellent, but also we're seeing our friends from the private sector who are going to be working on several of these projects joining us as well. So we'll give it just a minute. I think we're about 80% of folks have voted at this point. So if you haven't had a chance, please hit that button and we'll end the polling. And I think the folks that are not there are folks who have stepped away to get some coffee. So we'll give them like 10 seconds to come back. But I think this information is already giving us a good idea of who's with us today and what their area of interest is. All right, well, Molly, I think I'm gonna end the polling there. Thank you for doing that. As you can see, I'm sure everyone can see, if you can't, the results. I just shared them, and now we are gonna kick off the rest of this meeting. I know that most of us can't wait for 2020 to be over with. We've all had quite the journey as individuals, as communities, and as a nation. Personally, the pandemic upended our lives, and I think we have had to all become more resilient and find ways to adapt to the new normal quite rapidly. The same is true for all of our cities and counties who have had to rethink pretty quickly how they conduct business, how they interact with the public, how they keep the lights on with falling revenues and limited financial support from the outside. The cruel murders of George Floyd and other African Americans this year has shocked us and renewed our commitment, I believe, as individuals, as communities, and again, as a country, to understand and address how systemic racism plays out, our role in it, and our role in changing that very system moving forward. So I say that all to say that while 2020 is definitely a year to forget, it is a year to remember as well for how many of us have been re-energized and committed ourselves to the cause of creating more equitable and resilient communities. And frankly, that's the commitment that we as ARC, we as community development are hoping to further through our 2021 call for projects. How can we as the ARC, how we as the community development group within the ARC can leverage two of our most important programs, the LCI studies that we conduct and the Community Development Assistance Program, to help your community be more equitable and resilient. And that's going to be the predominant theme that we're going to be talking about today. That is going to be the predominant theme that we're going to go with for this next round for the call for projects. And to help you all imagine what that could look like, we have invited some very knowledgeable and excellent speakers who will share how they are doing exactly that in their day jobs. I will introduce them in a little bit, but I know, like I said, the first part of this meeting, we wanted to give you an opportunity to understand the basics about these two programs and also some of the changes we're making in line with the things that I just said. And once we have given you that information, we are gonna have small group breakouts. And then in that, we're essentially in line with our ideas exchange format. We're gonna ask you what are issues that are top of mind for you, and then what are some of the ideas that you're thinking about for submitting to one or both of our programs. And I think when we come back, we're gonna get into the panel discussion. I'll introduce our speakers then, and hopefully we're gonna have a very engaging discussion after that. So that's kind of the gist of the agenda for today. I believe I'm gonna turn it over based on the agenda to Jared Lombard, who runs our LCI study program. Just to be clear again, this is not the LCI transportation project call. This is the LCI study call for projects. And I'm sure Jared's going to clarify that as well. But I'm going to turn it over now to Jared, who's going to walk us through the program and the changes.
And I'm actually going to run through just a little bit of housekeeping, Sam, before that.
That's right. Sorry about that. We
all right.
do have housekeeping that we need to get to. So thanks, Molly.
All right. So as always, I promise to be quick. I know, as Sam said, we've got a lot of great things coming up. You may have noticed by now that I've muted you. I also thought I had disabled your cameras, but it doesn't look like I have. So I'm pretty new to Zoom. I'll get this figured out eventually, but it's nice to see everyone's faces. And don't worry, as Sam said, we have those breakout sessions. The ability to speak to one another will come back when you go into those breakout sessions. So you'll be able to unmute yourself and turn on your video. You'll get more information about how to engage with one another at the breakout sessions in a little bit. Anna will give a little bit more information to you at a later time. Remember to use your chat function, and I've got that little arrow pointing to the right-hand side of the screen. That's where it'll pop up once you click the chat icon. Submit your questions, but also any thoughts you might have. We'll return to them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentations. And finally, if you're having any technical difficulties, go ahead and log off, log back on. I know it sounds simple, but it tends to fix a multitude of things. If that doesn't work, go ahead and download Zoom's desktop app. In general, those tend to be a little bit more stable. And then if you continue to have issues, go ahead and submit a chat to me. But if you're having so many issues you can't even submit a chat to me, go ahead and email me at mbogle@atlantaregional.org, and I'll throw that up in the chats right after I'm done speaking. And I meant to add that if you chat me, I appear as Atlanta Regional Commission. So up next, as Sam said, is Jared with the LCI overview. Take it away, Jared.
All right, thank you, Molly. And just give me 1 second. And I'm gonna pull up my screen real quick. And here we go. Yeah, we're trying out Zoom for the first time as a big ARC meeting, so we're learning new things all the time. So thank you, everyone. So I'm really here to kind of just give a brief update on the LCI 2021 call for projects, and this is for LCI studies as for 2021. All right. So for those not familiar with the LCI program, we're really keeping it pretty similar for 2021, but the basic application information, the LCI program is a reimbursable grant program. ARC will pay up to 80% of the study amount. So if your study costs $200,000, ARC will pay $160,000, and you are responsible for $40,000. Applicants for the LCI program, and this is important, one of the main difference between LCI and the CDAP program, must be a community improvement district, local government, or a transit agency. ARC has up to $1.8 million to award this year, and you as the applicant must be able to go through procurement and complete all your work by November 2022. And all the applications and studies really have to have a multimodal transportation nexus, and that is very broadly defined. But we do have to make a transportation connection to your project. We cannot do park planning or some other things that really don't have that transportation tie. Just to give you an idea of the schedule, in mid-January, we don't have an exact date yet. The application window will be open. Applications would be due on February 26th. In that period, we'll have an internal review period. And then April, May, I always say April, but it always gets pushed to May. We'll announce our project selections. In June, we'll go through the contracting process with the selected applicants. And then you the applicants and the sponsors for will work through 2021 and 2022 through procurement. And then projects would be complete in November of 2022, which seems a long time from now, but it goes by pretty quick. Like last year, we have two main study types, what we call tactical, which really focus on implementation of your LCI study. So these could be feasibility studies, doing a little more detail analysis on a corridor, or it could also be doing a detailed, more like a housing study to really look at how does housing impact transportation in your community. And then catalytic, these are much more thinking about a traditional master plan update for your community. And this year, we also have two new pilot studies we're going to be testing out, and I'm going to talk about those in a second. All right. We are continuing our focus areas for the LCI program on our traditional main streets and downtown areas or transit areas. And the transit areas are defined as areas that have existing, fixed guideway transit stations or existing MARTA stations, or any area that is looking to get new high capacity transit that's in the Atlanta region's transportation plan. We also are continuing our 4 LCI priorities. This would be creative placemaking, affordable housing, green infrastructure, and smart city technology. Now, the application will ask you, how does your LCI study advance the following? We're looking for quality in the answers, not quantity. So if you can really think your community only could focus on 1 or 2 or 3 of the areas, that's and you can really describe that, how that's your study will advance those, that's better than writing a lot of information for all 4. And we'll have an application guidebook on our website later this year that will also help you with some prompts and definitions for this to help you answer these priority questions. Okay, well, it skipped one. So our LCI priority, our 2 pilot studies. The first one we're calling LCI Priorities Planning. This is kind of taking a step back, and this is really looking at kind of combining some of the work we have done in CDAP with the LCI program. And you would select this on the application, and in year 1, ARC staff will facilitate conversations with your elected officials and the communities on those 4 LCI priorities. So if you're not sure how your LCI study could address those in your community, we would facilitate those conversations, but also where and the potential areas of change in your community. This would then, you would still have to apply for an LCI application in the next year, but obviously, you would have a leg up in that application. So it's almost like a 2-year cycle where the first year, we really do more of a discussion and figure out all of that. And then the second year, you work more on the LCI planning studies. And then our next one as well. So this is something new we're also trying to focus on as well. So we're calling this the LCI Transit Creative Placemaking Pilot, and this is definitely a pilot project where we are really looking at how to really work with communities on both transit creative placemaking, but also pedestrian safety around transit. So, for example, all right. LCI has done a lot of great placemaking at transit stations, but we really haven't looked at how can we do creative placemaking at places like this. And when we really started thinking about this, we're like, yeah, there could be a few LCIs that have this available, or where this could apply to. So in the chat, really, kind of think about what are, this is all the bus stops in LCI areas. Anyone want to take a guess on how many bus stops there are on this map? You can put it in the chat. This is kind of like, guess the M&Ms in the jar. 480, yeah. 500, okay. 350, 2,500. Well, Jennifer's getting closer. All right. 5,300 from Greg Floyd. All right. Actually, we have over 4,000 stops in LCI areas. That was really surprising. And this was the 2019 data. We realized that there's been a lot of changes of transit, but hopefully those stops will come back later. All right. So this pilot process, only LCI areas will apply through the LCI program. And for this pilot, they're the only areas eligible. So if you do have stops that are not in an LCI area, they're not eligible right now. Only LCI eligible sponsors can apply. So this project's open to all LCI study areas. So even if it is a corridor. Selected LCI areas will really look at developing those creative bus stops outside of existing shelters within their LCI areas. But if there is an existing shelter, that has to have approval from the transit agency. What's also important about this, we're really going to be focusing on implementation quickly after the study process. So selected LCI areas will commit within their transmittal application to install and maintain a minimum of 1 bus stops after the completion of this project. Obviously, ARC cannot contribute to the construction of the stop or the final plan, and you also need a letter of support from the transit agency and whoever owns the right-of-way where that stop is located. So for example, for that, if it's a GDOT road where the bus stop is, then you need a letter of support from GDOT. Also, the bus stops must be ADA accessible. You must examine also safe access to the stops within the LCI area or the route. So, some communities have a lot of bus stops, but if you're really focusing on the route, and also provide recommendations for improvements. For the conceptual design process, we want strong community engagement. Hopefully the consultants can also partner with some local artists to really kind of help with that, conceptual designs. The stops have to show route information and incorporate creative placemaking. You have to examine at least 3 stops and come up with concepts. This could be a standalone study and an analysis, or it could also be incorporated with into a larger LCI study. So just keep that in mind. So we're kind of open on how this would be. So we're going to see different kind of concepts as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna, and she's going to give some information on CDAP real quick. All right, take it away, Anna.
Sorry about that, y'all. Hey, everyone. Good morning. I'm Anna Baggett, and I'm a planner in the Community Development Group at ARC. And like Jared said, I'm going to give you an overview of the Community Development Assistance Program and kind of our application process coming up next year. Make sure. So what is CDAP? If you aren't familiar with the program, the Community Development Assistance Program provides planning assistance to local governments, CIDs, and nonprofits in the region. CDAP's goals are to implement the Atlanta Region's plan at the local level, advance socially equitable outcomes, promote community resiliency, and foster meaningful community engagement. So like Sam said, we are going to renew our focus on social equity and community resiliency. These are kind of new elements to CDAP this year. Like Sam was saying, with social justice movements and the impact of COVID, we really saw a need to shift gears and renew the focus to these 2 concepts. So social equity, as we define it, is the just and fair inclusion into society in which we can all participate, prosper, and reach our full potential. And by this, we mean equitable policies address the harm from past planning and policy outcomes and work to eliminate present and future harm to excluded or marginalized groups. Community resiliency refers to the capacity for individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. And I think it's really important to remember that without equity, there is no resilience. You can't adapt to shocks if your community isn't working towards equity as well. So what is the same for CDAP this year? We still have our 8 priority issue areas, and instead of reading the whole Atlanta Region's plan, which I'm sure everybody in this room has done, you can align your project with 1 or more of the priorities listed on this slide. And they include lifelong communities, historic preservation, green infrastructure, access to healthy food, affordable housing, workforce development, smart communities, and finally, creative placemaking. So like the LCI program, we are not looking for projects that address all of these. That would be very, very, very difficult. So we're really looking for projects that align with one or a few more of these priority areas, while also advancing social equity and or community resiliency. So CDAP offers 3 different types of assistance. Primarily, we offer ARC staff-led technical assistance, meaning most CDAP projects are taken on by ARC staff like myself. We also offer grant assistance, but these are small grants, especially compared to LCI grants. But these projects also require a strong transportation element, much like LCI applications. We also have amazing partners that will take on projects as well, but that also might mean adjusting your scope from the CDAP application or even submitting an additional application to work within their programs. And these programs, our partner programs include Georgia Conservancy's Sustainable Growth Program, Georgia State's Graduate Capstone Projects, Georgia Tech's Graduate Studios, and last but not least, ULI's Technical Assistance Panels. To give you an idea of some of the projects that have received CDAP assistance in the past, I've listed our 2020 awardees on this slide. We've awarded assistance to projects of several different topics, from housing studies and engagement efforts around the housing conversation to creative placemaking and wayfinding studies. The assistant type varies too, even within staff assistance. From a full planning report review of the application process that's coming up early next year. Like I've mentioned, we're really looking for a good idea that aligns with a priority issue area, one of those 8 that I mentioned. We would also like to know how your projects advance equity and or resiliency in a meaningful way. Local governments, CIDs, and nonprofits are all eligible. That's a program component that's a bit different than LCI. And finally, we require signed letters of support from your elected officials and relevant parties. And much like LCI, we will release the application in mid-January at the same time. Before applications close, we will have a virtual open house to discuss specific application and programmatic questions on January 26th. And applications will close at the end of February, and we will announce the awardees in April or early May. We generally start our projects after contracting in August, and then we try to wrap them up in May of the next year. Okay, so now we're going to transition to our breakout rooms. And again, this is our first experience with Zoom, so hopefully this is a smooth transition. We're going to talk about issues your community is facing and how LCI or CDAP can help you address those issues. Before we break out, there are 3 ways you can participate in these breakout sessions. So if you go to this, the top of your Zoom screen and hit view options, you can kind of see on the screenshot right here. You can click annotate, and that will pop up a toolbar where you can add text or you can draw on our virtual boards. If you're on a cell phone app, you might not have this option, so you can go with number 2, which is just simply unmuting yourself and chatting with us. And you can also post your ideas into the chat, but make sure you're chatting the breakout session and not the entire group. That way we can make sure your idea is recorded. Molly, can you take us away?
screen is blank. That out, but yeah, so I think what we would be interested in is something, some community engagement, not necessarily a park design, but I think just some community engagement in partnership with Southern Conservation Trust to figure out, you know, kind of what would be the best ways to bring that space online and to activate that, and some just big picture vision for how the community sees it, that could be a resource for them. So that's probably our top idea that we want to explore. And then we have a couple or three others based on, you know, some of the feedback, but I will yield and let other folks kind of share their thoughts.
Okay.
Do other people have some ideas? Suzanne, Andrew, Anthony, you all have any ideas or any questions for us about CDAP or LCI?
For 2021, I'm very nervous about some of what we're going to see regarding some of the commercial establishments we have in the area. We're already seeing a lot of restaurants closing down, the impact on our hotels. We're seeing rising rates of homelessness in the area. But on the good side, like I was just talking about, we have you know, the opportunity for some major redevelopment to take place in the Gwinnett Place area now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are all very hot button issues, you know, especially the housing issue and the commercial development. Is there anyone else that's looking to solve some problems here in 2020? 2021. I'm definitely ready to get rid of 2020, so definitely 2021.
Hey,
Well,
Carrie.
if we
it's
don't
Molly.
have any, go ahead.
Hey, it's Molly. Actually, I'm just jumping in because you had said you were having issues sharing
Yeah,
your screen.
I'm not able to share my screen for some reason.
Well, let's see. Do you have the option of screen sharing at all? You're not seeing it
Yeah,
at
and
all?
it's telling me I can't share the screen. So
Okay,
I
let's
don't
see.
know why. And I have the file up on my
That again.
desktop. So
See if you can do it now.
now it's just showing me my Teams app and all of the Zoom things. So it's not showing me things that I can outside of this venue.
Okay. Well, have people who don't necessarily want to speak up just throw some comments in the chat, and we'll just record that chat log, and I'll see if I can't come up with another solution for you in the meantime.
Thanks, Molly.
Thanks. Bye.
Well, this
just a little bit more of the different programming and services that they can accommodate. We really do think that tactical organism could be a really good way for communities to create interest and provide safe and healthy spaces. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Lauren, it's Molly.
Hi, Molly.
Hey, how's it going?
It's good. It's good. We've come up with some different issues that our communities are hoping to address, as well as things that our communities are hoping that LCI and CDAP can help them
Great.
work through. Yeah.
Just as a reminder to everyone, if you have a specific project idea that you want us to follow up with you about, go ahead and put your name and contact information in there next to it, okay? And I'm gonna leave the room unless you need me.
I think we're good.
Yeah, all right, bye.
Bye.
Any recommendations, or have you all had people ask the question before about affordable commercial space? I think for all of the cities that where Buford Highway runs through, like we, are anticipating more redevelopment, but we want to make sure that the diversity that makes that area unique in the small businesses that exist there are able to stay. So does ARC have any recommendations on incentives for commercial developments to ensure that, the mom and pop businesses are able to continue to be where they're at?
That's a good question, Patrice. And it looks like Molly just jumped on, so maybe she can answer that one for us. Molly, did you hear the whole question? You're on mute, Molly.
I said I did not hear the whole question, but if you could summarize it for me briefly.
She was wondering about programs to address affordable commercial space in redeveloping areas to help small businesses stay where they are and stay afloat.
That's a fantastic thought. So you're wondering if we have any existing recommendations that we're giving to people. Is that right, Patrice?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is not something that we have explored yet. I do know that in the coming CDAP and LCI cycle, we do want to put together some toolkits for communities to help support local businesses. So that is something we're going to be exploring in the coming year. So if that's an interest that you or anyone else in the group has, definitely jot that down because that's going to be something that we want to take a look at as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I couldn't actually give you any recommendations right now, but I just wanted to let you know that is something we're thinking about.
Yeah, and it is documented here on our board, so we're good.
Okay, I'm going to jump off, Holly, unless you need me, and we've only got about a minute and a half left. So finish up any of your thoughts, and we'll see you back in the main room.
Great, thank you, Molly.
Thanks.
All right, seems like folks are coming back into the main room. Hopefully everyone had a good discussion and was able to get some clarity on either the programs or some of the priorities. And we'll just give it maybe another minute to make sure everyone is able to join us. And if they had to take a quick break, we'll just give it a minute and get started on the rest of the agenda, which I'm sure everyone's looking forward to. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers. So we'll get started in just a minute. All right, I think we have admitted most of the folks who left us to the breakout room. So I'm gonna get going with the second half of our meeting today. We're gonna start off by hearing from Suzanne Burns and Kimberly Smith. Suzanne is the Just Growth Director, the Equitable Development Director for the Partnership for Southern Equity. Kimberly Smith is the Director of Planning and Community Development for the City of East Point. PSC has been doing some really great work with the city since late 2019 to proactively find ways that the new investments that are coming into the city to ensure, I guess, that the new investments that are coming into the city of East Point would uplift all East Point residents, not necessarily push those out who are unable to keep up with the resulting gentrification. Now you ask, what is a equitable growth and inclusion strategic plan? That is what we have Suzanne here and Kimberly to share with us. So I'm gonna turn it over to them. I would encourage you to go to PSC's website, and we'll send the link in a little bit to learn about that work a little bit more. But at this point, I'm gonna turn it over to Suzanne, I believe, to get us going. And the way we're doing this is we're going to hear from Suzanne and Kimberly, and then we're going to hear from Alexandria McBride from the City of Oakland, and then we're going to jump into a Q&A session after that. So Suzanne, if you're ready, you can take it away.
Thanks, Sam. I'm going to share my screen here, so please let me know if you can give me a thumbs up if you can hear me and see the screen.
We can see it.
Great. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity to spend a few moments with you today. It is an honor and a pleasure, and nice to see lots of familiar faces among the group here today. We have a fairly brief slot here, so I'm going to try to move fairly quickly and pitch it over to my partner at the city, Kimberly Smith, to provide her insights as well. So let's see if I can get there we go. For those of you who are not familiar with the Partnership for Southern Equity, I felt like we needed to just have a basic sort of overview of our mission here. We're working to advance policies and institutional actions that promote racial equity and shared prosperity for all in the growth of metropolitan Atlanta and the American South. So we have a foothold here in the metro region with lots of projects bubbling in other parts of the South. The work tends to focus in 4 different portfolios around just energy systems, just growth or development, land use, just opportunity, which focuses on economic inclusion, and just health, which is a little self-explanatory. So this question of equity and East Point, I think very much in the beginning of our process emerged as, from many different stakeholders, why is this critical for us to think about now? The mayor of East Point, Mayor Dina Holiday Ingram, certainly approached the Partnership for Southern Equity in conversations and just sort of thought partnering a couple of years ago. And that ultimately led to her determining that this was a high priority, that as the growth was coming to East Point, now was the right time to be thinking about equity and equitable development. City Council unanimously committed to a process of exploring what this would look like for city operations, including city policy. We know that the development interest in the South Metro is accelerating rapidly, and East Point is perfectly positioned to be sort of on the beginning wave of that, that new investment and development. We know that the city has affordable housing right now, but it tends to be naturally occurring, and so it is unprotected. And we know that as investments come, if there are no protections in place, those affordable assets are likely to diminish. We know that there are historic industrial risk factors in the community, and that development needs to take into account those issues as it moves forward in order to create an opportunity for all residents in East Point to participate in the growth and the quality of life improvements to come. Excuse me. So what does an equitable high road development look like? And this is something that, you know, I think many folks on the line could probably share examples of particular projects, but I'll say at a sort of high level, this is where we're starting to think about a higher standard for success of a project, especially when there are public incentives on the table to help to bring that development to life. So we expect that an equitable development is considering environmental stewardship, that there need to be some new standards and expectations around assessment, disclosure, and mitigating negative impacts that come with that development. There should be absolutely a high bar around expectation of compliance with environmental permits, and some expanded requirements to ensure that, particularly if these are industrial operations or operations with heavy truck traffic, that sort of thing, that additional measures are being taken to ensure that those impacts are being offset and are being addressed through things like additional vegetative buffers or requirements to support additional infrastructure maintenance. Fiscal stewardship is something that again, we feel like is really core to thinking about what equitable development looks like. It has to be done in a way that it does not increase and continue to increase fiscal burdens on a city without being able to compensate in some way for those impacts and those burdens. We think that commitment to local training and local hiring is absolutely something that should be on the table and considered for anything that sort of calls itself an equitable or high road development. And we think that community stewardship is an integral part, that engagement must be happening with those being most impacted by that new development early and often and throughout the process, and that there should be explicit terms for the way that development interacts with those residents nearby. So what is an equitable growth and inclusion strategic plan? East Point is a pioneer in the Southeast and being the first to step up to do this. If you're looking for what we see as a good model, there are a handful of models out there. Certainly, I imagine that you'll hear a little bit about Oakland and their work, and we know they're doing great things in this space. We would point to probably the city of Philadelphia's Growing with Equity vision for inclusive growth as a good model. This will be approached, or has been approached, very much in the way that you would look at any other sort of strategic planning process in terms of data collection and engagement with residents and other stakeholders to identify the critical sort of baseline conditions and the policies and practices that may be in place right now that are either enabling equity or creating barriers to equity. We will be asking, have been asking a lot of questions throughout this process, trying to define vision and goals, strategies, objectives and metrics. How will we know what we're shooting for and how we're making progress towards that? And then actions specifically. What are the things that we know need to be done, not only by the city, probably predominantly led by the city, but potentially through other partnerships to meet those sort of targets. So we feel like one of the things that we have brought to this process that is really essential in approaching equity planning is sort of acknowledging that equity is not just a what. So it's not just a matter of, okay, here's a traditional planning process that will lead to more equitable outcomes, but it's a way. It is a process. It's a path that lifts up the voices of those who are most vulnerable and most impacted, those who have maybe borne the greatest burdens of inequitable development in the past, to ensure that this is not just a sort of check the box exercise and then a plan is put in place and implemented or tabled or whatnot by a particular local government organization. So the idea is really that the relationships that we're helping the city to build with residents and other stakeholders through this process will be long-term relationships with folks that will be very much a part of the implementation of this plan and holding the city accountable to that implementation. So this just gives you a sense of sort of our timeline in this process. We are entering into some pretty deep writing and focus group sort of conclusions over the next couple of months, and then we'll be finalizing the plan and delivering it to City Council in the spring and early summer for adoption. Objectives that are most critical to this vision of equitable growth and inclusion that I would say in draft form at this point, but we've been framing a lot of our conversations around these areas are inclusive housing, equitable industrial land use and environmental justice, and economic inclusion, which again focuses really on jobs and opportunity. And obviously y'all are probably familiar with this sort of idea of SMART objectives, so that these are things that can be acted on and measured. I will say that one of the things that PSE has brought to this in an early part of the process and really continuing throughout is a sense that that you really can't have equity in a community until you understand the history, and you understand the history from very different perspectives. So we have done a lot to do some research into some of the history, particularly around land use, around different industrial impacts. We have been building a cohort of resident leaders through what we're calling the East Point Leadership, East Point Leaders for Equity Academy. So that includes representatives from all corners of the city, who were going through a process of learning a lot of different things around leadership development, basic leadership skills, community engagement and organizing. They're learning how decisions are made within their local government and how they can affect change in that. And then they're moving into a period right now where they'll be plotting some different projects to execute that will be related to this plan. So that's been a large component of this. And I'll turn it over to Kimberly at this point to share a little bit about, from the city's perspective, why they felt like this was really important to undertake. And I know that folks are probably curious about how the city was thinking about resources like the CDAP and LCI as tools to help expand this equity consideration. So thank you. I will stop sharing screen and hand it over to Kimberly.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. Kimberly Smith with the City East Point Planning and Community Development Director. Thank you, Suzanne, for that. PSE has done some really, really good work for the city and has been a great partner in our efforts to build up on equity and inclusion within the city of East Point. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I have a few slides, and I know that we were given a small amount of time, so let me share here. So the city of East Point all of this came about. We have a new mayor, Dina Holiday Ingram, excuse me. And what happened back in 2008, that the city submitted a healthy community and inclusionary and equity application to the National League of Cities. And the intent of this Healthy Peoples and Thriving Cohorts program was basically to look at the policies that we had in place within the city and break it into 3 different components, which dealt with economic opportunity, housing, affordability, healthy, just being a healthy city, the population in general, and city and planning and design. So it kind of combined everything about planning into a nutshell, and it gave us the opportunity as a city to look at where we are. We kind of gave ourselves a score sheet and work within this cohort that we were in to kind of see where we are, see where we were with economic opportunity, to see where we were with affordable housing, and see how healthy our community was just in general. And then we tied that in with planning and design of how the city looks. The summary of that and the commitment to that was that the mayor and council unanimously approved a resolution for commitment to actually pursue every single opportunity that they had power to from a policy perspective, to commit to equity, to commit to making the city and the citizens as healthy as possible, and for inclusion. And this happened a couple of years before all the upwards has gone across the country, unfortunately. And so we were a little bit ahead of the curve in that aspect. So with that resolution, the city has been building upon green communities initiatives. They have also, we had the first agriculture plan for the state of Georgia as well, and some inclusionary components have been included inside of that. We also had an LCI, which is an industrial, a defunct industrial area of the city that has become some residential and some commercial, and many old warehouses are in that area currently. And so the city received the LCI this year in partnership with the city of College Park, Hateville, and Erythropolis as our partners to reimagine that area. And so what we did as a committee is look at how can we include all citizens of all walks of life into this RFP to reimagine this area as a mixed use industrialized area. And so in that RFP, we did put language in there that would include for outdoor spaces, public spaces, for public art, but also to look a little bit deeper into the history of the city of East Point, which is pretty a rich history. The city of East Point was built as an industrial city, and it was built as an agriculture city, and we have the railroad to support the agriculture that was going on, as well as the industrial businesses that come into the city in the 1800s. There were tar plants and just many different types of industrial businesses that came in at the time. So we want to include the history. And, you know, sometimes we don't like to talk about the evil of the United States being built off of agriculture and slavery, but, you know, we have to talk about it and see how we could fix it, how we can build it and include all walks of life and descendants of slaves, and acknowledge the impact that that had on people of color, specifically African Americans in the United States. And so we're tackling that. We do want to include art on this public space that would include heritage of the city of East Point, and to just uplift that as a general contribution to what East Point has come from. I'm trying to move on to the next slide. So excuse me, I'm not really sure. Let's see if that'll work. So within the cohort that we worked in with the League of National Cities, it moved us to actually look at auditing our comprehensive plan, at auditing our zoning ordinance, as well as looking at all of our zoning boundaries with the City of College Park, Hateville, and City of Atlanta to see what those zoning districts were like within those cities and within our cities. And, you know, were they industrial, were they commercial, were they residential, and to see how and where those interests or areas of concerns were, to what policies we could use to make them more compatible. What came out of our audits of our comprehensive plan, which we're due to update in 2021, and what came out of our zoning ordinance audit is the fact that we need to redo our zoning ordinance. And so we have a RFP out right now to do a complete overhaul of our zoning ordinance, so it can be inclusionary of all of the things that we found out in the audit that we gave. And I just want to say also that PSC they hit the ground running. They went over our comp plan and and helped us with our zoning ordinance and kind of pointed out straight away some of the issues and concerns that we have with it as far as inclusionary and equity is concerned. And so we appreciate them, for being able to point that out in their summary that they've given us so far with all of the suggestions and recommendations that we received thus far with them as thought partners. But also I want to touch on what resource guides that we have been using to analyze some of the issues that we have in the city of East Point. And one of the very, very important things is to know the history of your jurisdiction. It's very, very important to know from where the city has come from to know how to move forward. And I know another resource guide that we used was The Color of Law, written by Richard Rothstein, where we found out many, many different things about how zoning specifically was used to segregate communities from one another, and ultimately it lended to disenfranchisement of the poor and Black people across America. But there are some instances in City of Atlanta as well. There are many examples in that book. And so East Point was no different in that manner as well. And specifically, one of the main issues that we have is we have industrial zonings right on top of our residential properties. And that's something that we're actually working to mitigate through zoning amendments. Specifically right at this time, we're going to be working at the end of the month to get those policies moving forward. And then the other resource guide that I would recommend is the American Planning Association Equity Guide. And it would help us as planners kind of mitigate through the type of policies that we may want to consider when we're looking at what type of policies can be changed and can be uplifted for the communities. I did briefly, I talked about the LCI and Willingham Drive, and I talked about the zoning ordinance rewrite. Just in general, you have to look at the history. I keep saying that, but the history of the community is very, very important to see how you want to move forward authentically, because every city is going to be different. So what is different about us, and it may not be for many communities, is we had a history of having the industrial on top of the residential. And so we're putting in text amendments to bring in transitional zonings. We have a warehouse industrial zoning that we are proposing for the city, as well as a mixed use industrial zoning district classification, two new zoning district classifications that we're introducing in with the intent to mitigate those uses that are just certainly not compatible uses to be next to each other. And with that being said, I mean, I'll save any questions that anyone has about any of the policies or text amendments that we have coming forward to mitigate and to uplift healthy communities and inclusion and equity within the city of East Point. I went over my 5 minutes, I think, but I'm sorry.
It's okay. I think given the content that you and Suzanne presented, I think no one's keeping track of time. So thank you for that. I know folks have questions. I'll just remind folks, if you have questions, please put it in the chat box. If you'd rather ask your question instead of putting it in the chat box, let us know, and with the raise hand function, I believe, and then we can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself and we can have you ask the question. So I have a bunch of questions that I do want to get to with them, but before that, like I said, we're going to get to the other great presenter that we wanted to get in front of you and talk about some of the work that the city of Oakland is doing, which Suzanne made reference to. And if you look at the link that we have, that we put in the chat box for the city of East Point and the partnership with Southern Equity, there is some link back to the work that the city of Oakland has done as well in the recent past. So with that, I'm gonna quickly introduce Alexandria McBride. She is the City of Oakland's Chief Resiliency Officer. Alex brings her experience in environmental policy, finance and operations, project management, and community-based initiatives to this very unique role. She mentioned she's committed to developing, ultimately in this role, equitable and social justice-oriented solutions that are addressing some of the key issues being faced by the city of Oakland, and looking forward to applying those solutions to the city's Resilient Oakland Playbook, which I'm sure she's gonna touch on in a little bit. And if you have a chance, you should go and check it out on the city's website. I think it's a great document. Alex, thanks for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Great, good morning. Thanks for having me. And I'm so happy I got to join a little bit earlier and hear from Suzanne and Kimberly. It's great to kind of have your introduction as I jump into some of the stuff I want to share today. And I'm going to share my screen, and let's put it on presentation mode. So again, my name is Alex McBride. I am here from here in Oakland, California right now. I want to acknowledge Ohlone land, which is the indigenous land, indigenous tribe that was once on this land. When we talk about land and land use, I think it's important, as we all have been discussing, to acknowledge our past and acknowledge where we're coming from. I also am really happy to talk to you because I'm born and raised in Southwest Atlanta. So I'm very excited to see such great leadership and thinking around equitable engagement. So today I have a presentation where I'm going to start a little bit about concepts, kind of a lot of what you heard today. So I'll kind of breeze through some of the concepts. And the second, I wanted to jump into a bit of a case study and give you an example of two projects here in the city of Oakland, one that worked really well and one that we had a rough start and had to pivot and learn. And I think it's always great to acknowledge lessons learned. And as you're preparing your projects now, perhaps good input to help. So very briefly, and let me make sure I can, there we go. I appreciated the definition shared earlier. I, as Chief Resilience Officer, am a member of a global network of Chief Resilience Officers that all kind of acknowledge this definition, which is essentially acknowledging when we're talking about resilience, we think of shocks, which are chronic stresses and shocks. Shocks are sort of immediate events that we're kind of used to discussing. In Oakland, we're dealing with things like earthquakes and wildfires. But the stresses that cities deal with, most cities around the country and world, are also really important when we're planning for resilience policy. And let me break that down a little bit. In the city of Oakland, and thanks for the plug on our Resilient Oakland Playbook, you'll see a little bit of this here. One of the things Chief Resilience Officers do is we sort of document within our city, what are the shocks and stresses we're dealing with? So again, shocks, where sea level rise is a major one. Earthquakes, we're here in in California. I'm sure you've been hearing about our wildfires, which are not just decimating land, but also really harming air quality for a lot of people here in the city. But we also have stresses that I also think are very familiar to the communities in your area. Chronic homelessness is a major issue here in California and in Oakland specifically. Trust in government, which is something we really are trying to tackle. I think nationally there's a conversation around policing and race, and racial justice is a major sort of stress here. Oakland was a majority African American city, and we in the last 10 years, 70% of Oakland's Black population has left, and a lot of those forces, including gentrifications and others, are things that the city has to contend with. It's also the reason why we in the city are really trying to lead with sort of racial disparity studies and ensure that all of our policy making kind of is done within that racial equity lens. So these are a little bit of our shocks and stresses. And once we kind of think about these shocks and stresses, we, in our Resilient Oakland Playbook, really spelled out the types of priorities we'd like to see and specific goals and actions. It's very much our North Star. These are really major goals that we, continually have to meet. But I do think it's an important process to think about your city in particular, the shocks and stresses that you face, and then based on that shape sort of these goals and strategies to respond to it. I also just want to lift, and we'll be sharing, I think resources will be shared via email in a couple of days, but there's a really great report by a group done here in Oakland that talks about equitable community engagement. I'm lifting up some of their slides now, but just kind of thinking about how these problems are connected, and as we create solutions, we have to really sort of go against maybe the traditional silos we have in government, and really understand that this work cannot be done by one department or by one entity, by government alone. The partnerships that we build are going to be essential for responding to not just the climate crisis, but the racial and structural oppression we're dealing with, economic inequality. We're obviously seeing a real, our democracy is being challenged. So these are all related. So I start there and then take it to Oakland a little bit. As I mentioned, we try in the city to really acknowledge and contend with our past. I appreciated Suzanne's earlier comment, and Kimberly, taking a look at the history of your city. I think most are familiar with redlining, which was a discriminatory practice. This is a map of Oakland, and the red areas are sort of what we now consider to be East and West Oakland, even though it's kind of South, we call it East Oakland. And these are majority Black and people of color, predominant areas. And I put this map up then to show something called the Cal Enviro Screen. This is a snapshot of a tool that we use today here in California to map environmental burdens in communities. So essentially they look at your proximity to sources of pollution, et cetera, your air quality, and red and orange kind of denote, the highest score, which is essentially the highest burden. And you see that overlap. You see how the history of redlining connects to the issues we're dealing with today, the health of families, the ability for people to access, transit safely. And these are the types of connections we have to continue to make as we come up with solutions and move forward with the work that we do. So I start there, and again, I appreciate what's been lifted throughout this conversation this morning. And again, as I jump into the projects, I also want to bring up this community-driven planning model that we think is really important. And one, you know, and I've heard some great things lifted today. I would say, in addition to all the great concepts, like making sure you're building solutions with community, that you're reaching out to all types of audiences. I also think outcomes is a really important, a really important process. If you start with equitable outcomes as a goal, that helps to shape your policy. It helps to shape your solution. So that problem definition piece is really critical for the work we try to do here in Oakland. And with that problem definition, we define success and outcomes, and those outcomes are based on equitable measures. And one of my favorite kind of lessons, or ones I mentioned to a lot of my colleagues in the city who kind of wonder what that means. And one initial outcome we like to say is, if you've had one of your first community meetings or you share an idea with a new party, was your mind changed? What changed about your solution? And that's tracking that there is evolution in how you're thinking and that there's incorporation of different voices. So there's a little bit about our approach. And then I just want to jump into two projects where we sort of see how this type of work is modeled in practice. The first is a project called Equitable. Really exciting partnership led by the University of California, Berkeley, UC Berkeley here, which is right next to us in Oakland, with a really interesting idea, acknowledging that in order for us to get to the levels of energy efficiency we need here in the US, we can't just continue to build new structures. We have to figure out what to do with existing housing stock. How do we retrofit existing housing stock at scale? And instead of sort of a house by house model, what does it look like to transform an entire block, doing individual energy efficiency at each house, but at the same time, and getting deep savings because of that. And also including features like solar, renewable energy, shared transportation, a really great, really cool idea. And you see in the right, lots of really great companies, universities, and groups that sort of came together with this idea. I'm an engineer by training, so I get excited about this technology. And it was so, I guess, compelling to a lot of folks. We actually received $6.5 million in total from the California Energy Commission. And this is just, again, a model from the proposal where, there's a block. We're, again, looking at our water storage, we're looking at energy, and we're looking at lots of savings. And I think one of the things that sometimes happens is it's a really great idea that was really exciting, but where we fail was actually doing the deep engagement with a community, and acknowledging that this proposal may have to change based on what real people may want. So I put this timeline up to sort of share a little bit. We in June 2019, and when I say we, this is a UC Berkeley project. I want to acknowledge UC Berkeley is the lead. The City of Oakland is a partner because the block the block will be in Oakland. So we got an approval. We received really great accolades from the California Energy Commission, and we received $5 million in funding, which is resources are important, but we also realized that the block that we initially selected, or was initially selected, not really based on lots of outreach, we realized very quickly that it was not a reflection of the goals we had. We wanted to go to a community that reflected the city of Oakland in diversity. We wanted to go to a block that was excited and wanted to communicate and be engaged. And because that sort of early thinking wasn't done, even though we received funding back in June, we had to pause, June of 2019, we had to pause and revisit and essentially restart recruitment for a block in a really sort of intentional way. We ensured that we reached out to the communities and the types of groups, community groups that we knew could be great partners. We essentially had blocks work together to apply and sort of, request the partnership. And we have ended up with a block in an area called the Fruitvale here in Oakland, which is kind of, if you go back to that that map I shared, sort of in that red area. So a block very much in need of the types of investments we hope to support here in Oakland. And we're excited now to get started with a group of families and group of families on the block that have actually made some great recommendations on how we might make some changes to our proposal. So just want to share, it's not always about resources. We got the resources really quickly, but the intentionality around the place and people that this project would affect was something that that we've learned now should have been done way earlier and could have strengthened our proposal even more. But it's great now that we've been able to pivot, and we're really excited about essentially starting work on the block, shovel on the ground in January. And then I'll pivot to, I'm a bit biased. I've been with the city for 2.5 years, and I started working on this project within like 6 weeks of my starting. So this is really it's an exciting engagement. And it's called the Better Neighborhood, Same Neighbors proposal. The community group sort of proposed this name, again, acknowledging the harm sometimes with when you come into a community and invest, some residents see that as an investment that's not for them, but for future neighbors or future, to attract new people to the community. So we wanted to be even intentional in even the naming of this project, that this was an investment that we wanted for existing residents in Oakland. And the project is it's an initiative that has 5 projects that include housing, expanded bike share program, and the way we got to this initiative was we partnered with 12 organizations in East Oakland for a 1.5 years doing visioning trainings and doing really what we call deep community engagement, where we actually hired residents to establish work groups, collect feedback. We did pop-up engagements around the sort of East Oakland area. And after a 1.5 years, we received the vision. We were able to prioritize the types of projects East Oaklanders, or these 5 neighborhoods or 6 neighborhoods in East Oakland wanted to see. And we had we competed and had a compelling story to tell to the state, California Strategic Growth Council, where we ended up winning $28.2 million to actually implement deep projects around East Oakland. And I'll share a little bit, again, the impact here. With this investment, we're bringing in affordable housing, which includes a ground floor health clinic. And it's really interesting. Again, this was something lifted from the community before the pandemic. We knew that this area wanted culturally competent care that wasn't really available in that area. And now the fact that we are having a health clinic in this area means even more today, obviously, with the world we're in. We're actually purchasing through a group called Planting Justice an area that will become an organic nursery, one of the largest nurseries in the country, building a new park, expanding bike share. And what's really exciting is when I say we, this money is not coming to the city to implement. We're actually paying, and this money is going directly to community groups and to these organizations that are doing the work themselves. So there's a level of capacity building that allows these organizations to grow, to bring on staff, and to continue to do the work that they have been doing, but just at a larger scale. So I know I'm running quick on time or low on time, and I too want to address questions and maybe ask some questions to Kimberly and Suzanne, to Suzanne as well. So I'll wrap up. This is just a visual of the 5 square mile area in Deep East Oakland that these projects are concentrated in, and just acknowledging the many partners that made this happen. So yeah, and always nice to see smiling faces from one of our many engagements. Really great talking to you. This is my contact information, and yeah, I look forward to jumping into a deeper conversation.
Thanks, Alex. Again, great information. And I think many people this year, we will be sharing the slides. We'll make sure that we get them to you, because I know there's a lot of great information in here. And I myself want to get a hand on all these presentations and spend some time with them. So we'll be sure to send those back to everyone. At this point, I scribbled together a bunch of different questions, but I did want to, maybe this is a question which I'll start with maybe Suzanne, and I definitely want to hear from Kimberly and Alex as well, is one of the things as we're specifically talking about LCI, the Livable Centers Initiative, is one of the main goals of the program is to be able to do meaningful community engagement, right? And that is something that over time, as we're learning and learning new practices, learning as we're doing work in communities, we're sharing with the consultant community, and the consultant community is also continuing to evolve their thinking of how to engage the community. Now, I heard a lot about how you want to be building solutions with the community. You want to be thinking about proactively engaging the community. I just wanted to sort of maybe hear from you if you have any specific examples or things that, as we're getting into the next round of LCI studies, the consultants should be thinking about, we should be thinking about, that is fundamentally different as it relates to engaging the community. And I'll say the last thing I'll say is, because one of the things we have said more clearly in recent times is that we want to ensure that when we say it's a livable center, it needs to be livable for all. It's not only livable for the few folks who can afford to live there, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the folks who either live there or the folks in the community can afford to live there. So, Suzanne, did you want to start and maybe get the others in as well?
Sure. I'll try to keep this really brief. I think you know, this idea of deep engagement of history is all tied together when it comes to finding ways to interact with the residents who are being impacted by planning decisions. And I feel like one of the things that that has been less a common practice in the past, but I know it's starting to increase a bit, is to imagine engagement conversations with residents in, you know, in their backyard, in their complex, you know, in whatever way you can take it to them, so that they're not being asked to come out or to sort of be proactive in participating as much, and allowing that first conversation to begin with a little bit of level setting, and, you know, what's been your historic relationship with the city. Help us understand where maybe things went a little south at some point. Help us understand where a promise was made that wasn't kept, where a planning process occurred, you showed up for a meeting, you never heard anything back. You never knew what happened to that plan. Was it implemented? So I think really listening in the beginnings of this process is something that should just be woven in as a general rule. And I think what you'll find, I mean, and, you know, to the point that Alexandra brought, yeah, is that if you're not hearing new things in those conversations, then you're not really listening enough. You're not asking the right questions. You should be going in with as blank a slate as you can, and know that, yes, we're going to be responsible for a plan for a particular corridor, a plan for a certain development. But know that people will come and have a lot of other things they want to unload, other things that they want to share that are much more relevant to their day-to-day experience than your plan. And you need to be prepared to listen to that and to respond to that in at least okay, this is what I heard. We need to be able to carry that back to the folks that were involved in maybe that project. But there's a lot of trust building that has to happen. And that trust doesn't happen when you walk in with, here's our planning process. What do you think about it? And so, you know, ultimately that becomes a factor of time and trying to think about, if you're coming in with a very set scope and a set timeline and you have to affect this process during a year or something along those lines, how can you tap into other trust building processes that maybe occurred in the past? Other partners, folks who have trusted relationships, how can you enter into relationship with them so that then you have a bit of a liaison into that? And that's probably starting to ramble a bit, so I'll stop there. But those are some immediate things that come to mind.
Thanks, Suzanne. That's great. Kimberly, Alex, anything based on your experience on the ground, working in the community, lessons learned about community engagement that we should be taking into account as we're going about planning in our communities?
I can name two things, and just to go into more detail, I love Suzanne's point about acknowledging, coming in about, hey, this is the plan I have, and this is kind of where we want to focus, is not necessarily the best way to engage. I spent a lot of my time taking feedback about something that may not have even been in my purview or department, but I was committed to then going back to my colleagues and following up. So the ability to be a translator, a liaison, is critical, and acknowledging that it's not about your outcome. The goal is the trust building. I'd also really, something that's worked really well is using the trusted relationships in the community, and really, bringing in, and if it's hiring or contracting, but actually working with the community groups on the line, on the front lines. The benefit of that is that you're, again, helping to build the capacity of an organization that usually is small, underfunded. You're bringing resources there. You're using that connection to then increase your ability to connect with lots of residents. So it worked really well when we were able to hire our consultants or subcontract to community organizations that, we were doing climate work. That doesn't mean we need to go to a climate organization, right? There's tons of orgs that are reaching communities that might not have climate as a focus, but are critical voices. And that's where you have to understand the groups you're trying to connect with, and open up your mind about the types of organizations that might help you get there. So I'd also really, challenge directly bringing resources there to the organizations that are working in those communities.
Thanks, Alex. Kimberly, I think you're on mute, Kimberly.
Hi there. Was it my turn? If you could please repeat, I had to step away for 2 moments.
Yes, we were just going around and talking about the fact that we put a lot of stress on community engagement and fundamentally looking at it differently and engaging folks proactively, upfront, ongoing. Wanted to see if there's any examples that you can think about where the engagement was more meaningful and more reflective of what the community needs were.
Well, I'll say PSC has really helped us out in this perspective. They have gone on above and beyond meeting with citizens, having and Suzanne helped me with the name of the program that you all are running from the citizens group, the Citizens Academy.
Point Leaders for Equity Academy.
Yes, and so we're really, really trying to put our thumb on the pulse of what are the best ways to obtain citizens' impact from the most authentic ways we can gain it. But I will say, due to COVID-19, we've had everything on Zoom and Teams of that sort, and we've had the most participation that we've ever had, because this was a very, very big issue for us. Even with just going through our zoning cases, through the cycles, we've had little to no participation from the community when it was in person. So technology has been a really big plus for us, and then our partners in PS&E, and actually going out and getting contact, like on the ground, getting contact with people and extracting their thoughts on how these different policies are going to impact them. So just doing more of that.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Now, maybe I'll take it a step back further, because as Alex was talking, I had another thought, because maybe the way I phrased it put the onus more on the consultant once the project has started to come up with how to meaningfully engage the community. And I was thinking if that's already too late in the process, because how do we, as through the LCI program, part of what we are doing is helping communities understand what they need to apply to us for. And now, is there anything that you think, and that there's that step of the applicant, in this case, the city or the county or the CID, trying to put a pulse on what the community needs are and putting that into a scope. And so often the consultant is stepping into that foundation that's already been laid. So is there anything that communities, as they're coming up with these scopes of work, as they're trying to understand what the community needs are for the project, that they need to be doing upfront in terms of engagement as well?
For me, I mean, I would recommend, I mean, everything starts with the comprehensive plan, because that's the vision focal point of every community, and seeing there's a component in the comprehensive plan that is titled community needs. And so a lot of thought went into how they captured that information into that plan in general. And so there may be some nuggets of opportunity by just by looking at the community needs section of your comprehensive plan, and go back and see what some of those comments were, because at that point, when you're doing a comprehensive plan, you're going out and trying to get as much input from the community anyway. So I would start there, because we're supposed to be building on that vision anyway over a period of time. So I would just recommend starting there. And then the second place I would go is to the schools and through the children.
Can you tell a little bit about more about that, when you mean like go to
through the children? So, you know, everyone, you know, the kids, I mean, they are our future. And so, you know, you have the pre-K, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, high school. I mean, they have a lot to give as far as their thoughts. They think about things a lot differently. So if there's a way to coordinate with the school district and actually get into the schools to get information to the children, and so the children will take the information to the parents, and then that would be a way to communicate without, you know, having too much hassle. I mean, I know when I was in kindergarten, when my children were in kindergarten, pre-K, they would tie the notes on them, tape them on their chest, and, you know, they don't know what it is, but it gets to the parent. It's like this is the first thing you see, like, what is this note taped to my chest? I mean, you have to be really creative on how you reach the community at large.
Yeah, and if I could piggyback on Kimberly's point, yeah, this is an area where I think we haven't necessarily been able to act on this as well as we had hoped to because of COVID and some of the limitations on the face-to-face activities. But I would say in general, don't overlook the Parks and Rec department for your city as an incredible conduit into relationships. And that was one thing we got very early on in the work with the city of East Point is, you know, that the leadership in that department actually came up through the Parks and Rec programming for the city and had, you know, knows everybody in the city who's ever had a kid in a football team or a tennis team or, you know, anything. And so, yeah, I think trying to go where the people are who are not going to show up for a town hall, who are maybe not going to dial in for a Zoom, athletics is a great way to try to reach.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. I know, and I just want to acknowledge we are running a little late. I want to thank our presenters for being there. We're going to do one more question, and then I'm going to turn over to the chat box and see if there's anything else if folks can hang around for 10 more minutes, I feel like this is just really good conversation and content for all of you as you're thinking about your projects. So one more thing I wanted to sort of take a pivot and talk about a little bit about what Kimberly started talking about in terms of like the Leadership Academy is y'all, again, from East Point's perspective, and I believe to a certain extent from the City of Oakland's perspective, the leadership seemed invested in addressing inequities. There was an understanding and an acknowledgement and a willingness to move forward in addressing it. And what would you say for cities and places where that is not the case? So if it is, there's folks on this call who are probably 100% behind everything you all said, but when you go back to City Hall and you think about how you're going to actually make this happen, you need a lot more buy-in and acknowledgement and encouragement for that work to move forward. So when that does not exist, what would you say are ways that you could still move the work forward?
For me, well, the City of East Point, they've made my job very easy because they unanimously adopted these policies and resolutions from the beginning. But if that was not in place, planners just in general, they have the Planning Commission as their sounding board, where they can bring these type of policies or proposals to the Planning Commission in a proposal, from a proposal perspective, and present it up through to council or through the Board of Commissioners in that manner. So you have lots of committees, the Fulton County Environment on environmental justice. I mean, they're just different organizations within every jurisdiction. And so I've worked with many of them throughout Metro Atlanta, with Fulton County, Henry County, Clayton County, and a lot of the southern cities. And so you go through those neighborhood communities and bring it up through the Planning Commission, because the Planning Commission is a recommending body to the council, and that would get you directly to how you get your proposals acted upon, up or down. But at least it'll get them in front of them and in front of the public.
I'd also chime in that urban resilience, or resilience is the buzz term, but I think people understand, as we're dealing with these major events, that we have to think about how to respond. In a lot of cases, resilience is sort of non-controversial. They're the idea of it. And coming in and saying, oh, I'm committed to resilience, then the next step then is acknowledging that, there is no equity there's no resilience without equity, right? That disasters don't hit communities the same. We're seeing it with COVID, disproportionate impacts on Black and Latinx folks. We're seeing it with every disaster. So I think coming in with the resilience and saying, if you're committed, to making this city more responsive to disasters, that has to come, the inevitable component is that there's an overlay of equity and an understanding of how we need to understand what communities need in order to then design solutions to help them recover.
Thanks, Alex. And Suzanne, I know now I'm forgetting the name again. The East Point Leaders for Equity Academy is one example of how you're, again, engaging the leadership and getting them to understand this. Have you found in your experience that being an effective tool, just having that dedicated training and engaging folks on the front end of this so that they're getting more acclimatized? If that is the case, what level does that begin at? Is it at the elected leadership? Like Kimberly said, is it at the planned commissioners? Where does cities start?
Well, I think this is still early on our journey, and I'll say, very frankly, that PSE has seen some really exciting, promising results just in terms of the sort of activated resident leaders that are emerging from these different leadership programs. The process of weaving this into a specific planning process is new. So I think the jury is still out, and what we know is that we're hearing anecdotally as the class sort of moves along ways that people are saying, oh, yeah, I never thought about that was something I actually could have an impact on. I could have a say. And so we know that that's not going to go away, that as we have leadership who's committed to plugging these new leaders into different mechanisms moving forward in the implementation, that those connections will continue to be made. So I would say that for local governments, a starting place would be to consider what leadership programs do you have in place right now? Whether it's at a county level, like a leadership Gwinnett or a leadership Cobb, or is it a local engagement? Maybe it's something that is sort of affiliated with a Rotary or another sort of civic organization. But what leadership programs do you have for your location right now? And have you ever thought about exploring ways to tap into those leaders as liaisons into different parts of the community in planning and land use decisions? So I think there's probably a lot of leadership that sits there waiting for an opportunity to actually use the skills that they've developed. So I would just encourage people to start there as a way to maybe build on things that you already have.
Okay, thanks, Suzanne. All right, I hate to cut it here. There's a lot of questions. I hope I was able to weave some of the questions that came in the chat box into this conversation as well. I wanted to be respectful of everyone's time. Wanted to thank our panelists again for being here with us and sharing all this great information. So thanks, Suzanne, thanks, Kimberly, and thanks, Alex. And I think we're gonna go into closing this meeting now. So, and I know Alex, I don't know if people put it together. Alex is dialing in from California, so she logged in at like 7:30 in the morning for this. So we really appreciate her getting an early start to her day. So I hope this meeting was helpful for y'all to start thinking about project ideas that you have as you think about an LCI application or a CDAP application. I will say this again, is if you have any questions about either of those programs or about a project idea that you have, please reach out to us. The primary contact for LCI studies, as you know, is Jared Lombard, and for the Community Development Assistance Program is Anna Baguette and Molly Bogle. So please do reach out to them. A couple of other announcements before we close this. The ARC's offices are closed between Christmas and New Year's. And so just if you have any inquiries or any things you'd like us to respond to, please keep that in mind as you reach out to us. And then the last thing I wanted to do, I wanted to have Marion Liu, who is our new manager for the community engagement efforts and the arts programming that we're leading through the Community Development Group, but also for the Atlanta Regional Commission as we move forward. Wanted her to share a little bit about the upcoming 2021 ALMA program, which many of you may be familiar with, and if you're not, I'll let Marion just talk very briefly about that. Marion? Marion, I think you're on mute. Or we can't, there you go. No, we still can't hear you. Your screen's lighting up, but we can't hear you. Nope.
Hey, Marion, I didn't have you as a co-host for a minute there. You should be able to unmute yourself now. Try it again.
I mean, we cannot have a virtual meeting that does not have a technical glitch. So this is par for the course.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like she is able.
That's okay. So what we're going to do in the interest of time is that we're going to send that information in that follow-up email, which is, again, changes to the program that we're looking to make and tell you a little about the upcoming application. Please be on the lookout for that in the follow-up email that comes from Molly. With that, Molly, was there anything else I needed to cover before we let people go?
Not at all. Marion just wanted me to confirm that we'll be sending follow-up information about Alma. So we'll get some details out to everyone.
All right, excellent. Well, thanks again, everyone. Hope you all have a good rest of the year and have a great beginning to 2021. We'll be hopefully hearing from you soon, or even better, seeing you in person in the new year. So have a great day and talk to you soon.